All right, so let's get started with our style sheet. If you remember, we're in Dreamweaver, or at least I am. So you're going to find in your file asset panel, you're going to find style.css and open it. And after talking about ems and rems, one of the first things I want to go ahead and show you, we had figured this out earlier in the typography section. We had gone ahead, if you remember, actually, let's jump back here. We just talked about this earlier. In the HTML section, the font size was already set to 62.5%, and we discussed, why we're doing that. So let's scroll down and find the typography section, which is the 2.0. It's the second section in the style sheet. And if you look here, what we have is we've got our font size set to 16 pixels, and I already discussed that that's sort of the standard unit of measure. It's the basic default browser style sheet unit of font measurement. So we're resetting this back to 16 pixels. And then we've also got, basically, if you remember back from what I said before, the font size is fallback in pixels, and then we redeclare the font size again as rems, so it's 1.6 rem. And if you look up here, I'm going to pull up the calculator really quick and just show you kind of how this is working. So if you remember what I said about rem, okay, basically rem looks to its root unit, and I lost my calculator here. Let's grab it again. So if the root unit of measure up here is, where is it? 62.5%. So if we take 62.5 and we multiply that, come down here, times 1.6, look what we're going to get. So multiply that times 1.6. We are going to get 100. So basically puts it back to 100%. And if you remember, the 62.5% was the hack that we had for Internet Explorer. And so basically what this whole thing does is it sets it back up so that the standard for the browser is then going to be it's going to be the standard browser size of 100% for the normal font size. But what this is going to do is, because we're setting this up for the body, buttons, input, select, text areas, right? We're setting this up so that it's the base size. Now, what we can do from this point forward is we can choose to either make things in ems or rems based off of that. And if we look at rem, if you remember, rem is going to go back all the way to the very top level, and it's going to look up here at this HTML font size, because remember what I had said before in the last demonstration is that rem is root m. So it's it's a relative m, but it looks to the root of the entire document's original setting for font size declaration. Okay, so let's take a look really quickly at, I would like, if you just look really fast at this, it's hard to see what's a heading and what's not. And so just really fast, I'm kind of jumping a little bit out of order from the book, but I think that it's really nice to at least be able to see where your heading levels are. So if you come down just below the declaration that's got all of your heading levels set with a font family, then you can go ahead below it and start declaring specific sizes for each of those heading levels. And one of the other things that you'll notice that I didn't do is where it says Oswald semi-bold here, I didn't provide a fallback, so I should probably go ahead and do that. And so I'll just put sans serif as my fallback. Okay. All right. And so let's come down here right below all the heading levels, and we're going to just really quickly do a declaration. Actually, let's just go ahead and we'll set all of this up. We'll say font size, and let's start the font size for the H1 at like 28 pixels or something like that, something much larger. And then again, we're going to do our font size again in rem, and then you can kind of see what happens. So we can say 2.8 rem. All right, and then I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it, and we're just going to change it. So we'll do H2, And then let's just lower this like by maybe 4 pixels, 4% roughly. And then we'll do an H3. And this will really help us start to identify maybe 22. Let's see what that looks like. 2.2. Let's go back down to H4. Anyway, it'll help us identify where different pieces and parts are in the layout. Let's try 20. And let's do H5. Let's try that at 18. Let's say 1.8. And then we can do H6, and that's as far as the heading levels go. We can do that at 16 so that we're getting back down to our original size, but we could also like later come and say that this is a heavier weight or something like that. Okay. All right, so let's save that, and then let's go ahead and put it up on the server. Let's say put, and it's going to connect to my server. Remember, I already set this up through FTP in a previous demonstration. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you can go back, or you can just use a different FTP service besides Dreamweaver's. And actually, it looks like I'm having problems connecting to the server through Dreamweaver. So, whenever stuff like this happens to me, it doesn't throw me off because it's a very good chance it's happening to you too. So it gives me an opportunity to show you an alternative way. Instead of troubleshooting the connection right now and taking the time to do that in the demo, what I did was I went ahead and I used a free tool called FileZilla. You could use FileZilla or CyberDuck or something else. And the thing that's sort of unfortunate is, when you use something like this, you're going to have to constantly go and upload stuff as you make changes in a different interface instead of using just the convenient Dreamweaver thing. But if that does happen, this is an alternative. So what I did was I went and I put in my host information up here, my username, my password, the port number is 21, and I use this quick connect. And on the left side is where you would navigate to the place that you have your files on your computer. So what I did was I went to my desktop over here, you see here, and then I went down to CE, and so CE is my Canon Electric. And then what I would need to do is go inside of WP content. So I'll double click there, go inside of themes, go inside of TopCat, and then here are my TopCat files on my local computer on the left, and on the right I have my connection to the server. So you remember I need to go into public HTML. Okay, and then I'm going to go into CE. Okay, and then I'm going to go into WP content and themes. And then I'm going to go into my TopCat theme. Okay, and so now what I want to do is I want to find on my left side, which is my local computer, I want to find that updated style.css file, and I want to just copy it over to the server, and it should ask me if I want to overwrite the file, and I'm going to say yes. Okay, so I'm going to click on OK to overwrite it, and then it's going to change that file out. And so now I can come back over here to my style sheet, to my website, and if I hit refresh, I should see the changes go into effect. Let's try that again. Let's do shift. It's having a hard time. I think maybe something's going on with my server. So I'm going to hold down shift and do a hard refresh. I think the server is really slow. Either that or it's my connection. And there we go. So I can see that the scale of the headings is, and then it just, I think the server is really slow right now. So it took a second for it to load up all my fonts as well. But you can see now that I've at least got a better scale on my heading levels, and I can actually see with a lot more detail, what those things look like. So the next thing that I want to point out, it's hard to tell what's happening in this unstyled page, but if you'll scroll down to the bottom, let's go to the very bottom, you're going to see that we have what would normally be like in a sidebar. Down here, first of all, is the footer, and if I were to right click this and say inspect it, you'll see that you can kind of see what the different parts are here, and that's the div that's inside of a footer. Okay, so but it's not like a traditional footer like that's a widgetized area where you can add widgets and stuff. We're going to make something like that a little bit later. But before that, one of the things that you'll notice, like if you were to, let's collapse the footer, and then if you hover over this where it says ID equals content, that's the content of the page, the rest of the page. And then you can see that it doesn't, if you look down here where the footer is, you'll see that when I hover over content, footer isn't selected. So footer's not part of the content ID. So if I expand the content ID and then I kind of come down here, you see that there's a thing that's called div ID secondary, and it says class as a widget area. And so these are the kinds of things that are going to be really helpful to you whenever you are using the Chrome Inspector or Firefox Inspector, Safari Inspector, or whatever you're using, so that you can see, you know, the sections that you're highlighting. And let's just kind of scroll up and you can see how much of that is actually part of that widgetized area. Let's say it's still, and because we're using that monster widget, we've got tons and tons of stuff in there, like lots and lots of stuff. And I think that's probably starting somewhere around the archives list. Yeah, in fact, that's true. So it starts with archives list. And if I were to expand that, you see that each different widget area that gets added is an aside, all right? And that's the way that the monster widget adds stuff. It adds it as an aside inside of that secondary widget area that we added. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to be able to take this secondary ID and we want to make it as an actual sidebar that floats to the right. Because if you remember back to the XD sample that I showed you guys for the Canon Electric mock-up that I made, for pages that are not the home page, which is pretty much the majority of the pages of the entire website, there's going to be a floating right-hand column where I'm going to be able to put some widgetized area things. So because this is an actual widget area and it's an actual, what we refer to as a sidebar, then we can actually style that in such a way that we have a separate style sheet for anything that deals with the sidebar. And if you go back into, let's just take a look in Dreamweaver, even though it's not connecting to the server, we can still look at our file list. If you were to drill down and you look inside of our theme, all right, so this is our TopCat theme. So if you look inside of our theme, you'll notice that there's a folder here that's called layouts. If you expand that, and you take a look inside of that, you'll notice that there is already a style sheet that is called content-sidebar, and then there's a sidebar-content CSS style sheet. So that's a little bit confusing, but we're going to use just one of them for right now. We're just going to be using the one called content-sidebar for right now. So what I need to do is I need to on-queue that style sheet into my functions file. So if I go over here to functions, I'm going to double-click to open that, and let's just get over here. And I want to go back down to the place where I'm on-queuing things. And you can scroll down and it's going to be down right here where it says function TopCat scripts. And then where we've got font for headings, we're loading something, we've got font for the content, font for icons. We've got all these things for different fonts, right? But one of the things that we need to look for is just the regular style sheet that's getting pulled in there. And then right here you see it's the WP on queue style and it says get style sheet Yuri. That's going and just grabbing our actual style sheet. All right, it knows to go and grab the style sheet that way. In fact, if it's helpful to you, you can come down here and put a comment that says next line grabs the main style sheet. Well, let's just say main style sheet style.css. Okay, and that way we know that that's what that line does. But so right after that, we want to load something that will override certain parts of that main style sheet that would be relative to the content that's on the sidebar. So let's put something like next line loads the content sidebar.css file for sidebar, or let's say for 2-column layout or something like that. All right, you can call it however you want it to call. And instead of reinventing the wheel, what I'm doing basically is I'm on-queuing a style. So if I look up here where I pulled in like Font Awesome or something, I'm going to use this WP on-queue style. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste it down here. And I'm going to change some parts of it. So where it says Top Cat Font Awesome, I want to change Font Awesome because I'm creating basically a new handler and I want to, or new handle. So I want to call this, let's say, layout dash CSS so that I know that this is specifically going to work for my layout. And then I'm going to not use this directory. I'm going to use a different directory. We're going to use layouts / and then it was content dash sidebar CSS. And then if you want to just double check, you can click on where it says files and you see that it is in the layouts folder and the name is content-sidebar.css. All right. And so that's going to be the correct on-queuing. So let's save that. And let's go ahead and let's upload this file. And if you remember, I'm having problems with my Dreamweaver, so I'm going to do it through FileZilla really quick. The other way that you could do it, if you want, and it's only really good for uploading individual files, is you could also go through, if you're finding that that's a little bit painful to go through your some other FTP program, then you can go into your cPanel and do it that way too. So anyway, what I would recommend then is if you're going to do it this way, here's my suggestion. If you are ever worried about overwriting something, and I guess it would be the same thing with FTP, but if you're ever worried about overwriting something and you don't want to lose the backup version of it, you could always go into, like let's say you're doing this in cPanel, you could go to your functions file and let's call it functions-old. All right, so that way you've got your original functions file and it didn't rename it. Oh, okay, it took a second. My server is really slow for some reason. I'm not sure if it's my connection or not, but anyway, it did rename it. So what I want to do now is I want to upload my other file. So let's go ahead and it's going to go to the cPanel's upload file manager. So this is the other way that you could do it if you don't want to go through FTP. And for some reason, it is also slow. The server is just very slow. So I can either select my file by clicking this, or well, let's just do it that way. Okay, so I'm going to go into CE, and then we'll go into TopCat. Let's go there, and it's inside of. Actually, we're doing functions right now, so I'm going to choose functions, open, and I do want to overwrite the existing files actually, except that I actually changed I changed the name to functions-old, so I have my old functions version, so I can close that, and now I can come back over here to my website and I can do a refresh. I might have to do a hard refresh since I'm having so many problems right now, but anyway. And there we go. And you see that now I've got a sidebar that's on the actual right side. And if you wanted to see how that's behaving, we can right click this and inspect it. And I'm going to have mine open up down here on the bottom so that it doesn't get in the way of my horizontal span. And if I go up here where it says secondary, all right, you can see that it's being it's doing a right float, and even if I took this right float off, you see it stays there. And the reason that it's staying there is because if I click on, if I go up here to content area, see I've got this margin -25, right? And because this is a left float and I have a margin of -25, it's going to automatically suck that up there with that margin of -25. Without it, it won't. Now, see, here's the thing. It's got a width of 100%, and I don't really love doing things this way. You could also sort of play around with this and say, all right, well, what would it be like if I didn't do this weird margin thing? Instead, I did a width of like 70%, for instance, and let's just take that margin thing off. And that's on the content area, and then I could come down here to my widget area, and I don't have to float this, right? I can change the width. Let's go back to 30% since the other one was 70%. Okay, and if you wanted to give it like a background color or something just to see what was happening, you could, do that. Let's give it something like Alice Blue. That way you can see what's happening with it, right? And that's the that's that entire sidebar area. And then for the, this content right here where it's like got the site header, like we can do this whole primary area, right, where it's float left, right, we can give that a different background color. And let's do that like something else, antique white. I think in the book he has you put a border around it, but I'm just gonna, do this for a second so that you can see what's what. And then if you wanted to come all the way down here to the footer, you could right click that. Let's inspect it. And actually, let's go right here, inspect that. And then we'll click on the footer. And then you could give that a background color, right? Just so you can kind of see what's happening. And let's just do that as aqua, right? It's ugly, but whatever, you get the point. And then you'll notice that there's this like big empty spot over here. And then if you were to inspect it, it's going to jump about all the way back up to the parent container, which is the content. So there are lots of different ways that you could address that empty space if you wanted it to be the same color, but I don't know that that's necessary. But this will help you understand kind of what's happening. And like I said, I don't like to do that negative margin stuff. So I'm going to go back and fix that in my actual style sheet.